Today marks the 252nd anniversary of the birth of the great Unitarian Universalist. Actually, he was just a Universalist in those days. Theologian and preacher Hosea Ballou, a remarkable figure who remains one of my closest spiritual guides. Born in 1771 in a small town in the southwest corner of New Hampshire, Hosea grew up in a religious home, but he was greatly troubled by the harshness of the theology he was taught. Seeking answers to his questions, he devoted himself to the close study of Scripture and its relationship to the human condition. His difficulties were resolved when he discovered the doctrine of universal salvation. Oversimplified, universal salvation means that everyone gets into heaven. A more mature understanding, like the religiously grounded and carefully reasoned theology of Ballou, provides us with a deeply moral vision of how to be in relationship with the God of our understanding, with our neighbors, with ourselves, all in the context of our daily lives. As Mooch reminds us, we are in heaven. Universalism has been present in Christianity since its inception. A growing body of religious scholars point to the authentic writings of St. Paul, identifying him as the first universalist. Paul is following Jesus with a radicalized reinterpretation of the ancient Jewish theology of covenant. At the center of their teachings is an unshakable faith in God's unwavering love for all of creation, and God's desire that all of creation imitate God's universal love in all the created world's relationships. Hosea Ballou followed in this living tradition, and as do I. Ballou wrote and preached passionately on what he called universal holiness and happiness. Holiness is a word largely out of use among Unitarian Universalists these days, but Ballou's meaning might be recognizable to us in the terms of human wholeness or in loving kindness, wherein our concern and ultimately our passion is always for the well-being of all living beings. For Universalists, holiness is a birthright. Humanity has always been and will continue to be bound together in a holy covenant of love. Holiness is also a way of being in the world, the way of caritas, of charity. Charity in the higher sense of intentionally seeking, finding, and expressing the good already latent in each other and within ourselves. We are called to be charitable in thought and in deed each day of our lives. As many of you are probably aware, my life and work are informed by the practice of Christian mysticism. And so prayerfully, I'm going to share out of this practice with you this morning, doing so in the hope that I'll illustrate a little bit of how I understand universal holiness. Hospital chaplains regularly companion people who are experiencing severe emotional and spiritual pain. Some years ago, I was attending to the needs of a grieving person who asked that most difficult of questions. Why is God doing this to me? The question was certainly not new to me. But this time, for some reason in that space, something inside of me was torn open. That's the best way I can describe it. It just torn open. And out of that came a vision of the weeping Christ. For those of you who are familiar with the Christian Gospels, you may recall the scene where Jesus is going to see Lazarus, and on the way he's met by Martha, who tells him that Lazarus has died. Many English translations of the original Greek text read kind of prosaically. They say that Jesus wept. But the Greek scholar Sarah Rudin's recent translation offers a more direct, visceral translation. Jesus howled within with his very life breath and was greatly distressed. Together, Martha and Jesus fully embodied their overwhelming grief. This was the Jesus of my vision. And I felt assured in that moment that God was not standing in judgment, not doing something to us, but was with us, sorrowing in our sorrow. The vision was in its own way affirming. The grief was real. It was appropriate. And it was holy because God shared in it. I shared something of that vision, as best I could form the words in that moment, with a person in my care. That person also found solace, knowing that here in that place, we were not alone. We were not forsaken. That vision became a touchstone to which I could and I can continue to return, a kind of orienting prayer. Over time, the sorrowful Christ pointed me toward a path. The path led to a well. Within the well's depths lay salty water, which I came to understand as the place where God's fallen tears pooled, where they gathered. I can still approach this well when my soul is heavily burdened and find holy consolation. More recently, there has been a figure seated at that well. The figure is luminous, shrouded in a white light, radiating serenity, an incredibly comforting peacefulness comes from this being. I've come to know this angelic figure as Caritas. And I've come to notice that when I am caring for others out of a place of my own deep compassion, the luminance enveloping Caritas seems to shine with more strength, affirming what our hymn teaches, my heart is in a holy place. I am in spiritual sympathy with my God, my neighbor, and myself. This communal resonance is what I believe Ballou experienced as universal holiness, a spiritual condition open to us all. The light of Caritas is the Spirit of God, the very same light that shines out from the darkness and is not overcome by the darkness, that is celebrated in the most mystical of the Gospels, the Good News according to John. Our Quaker neighbors speak of an inward light within each of us. when I encounter this light shining forth from one of my neighbors, radiating in their thoughts, in their deeds of loving kindness, I am moved to a quietly sustaining joy. I think this is the joy that Hosea Ballou recognized as universal happiness. And so it is here, amid the soul-deep joy that is the sign of living in universal holiness, that we recognize the spiritual wisdom of Hosea Ballou. To seek, to draw out the light of caritas in all of our relationships, however slender, however big the bark. This is the Universalist's moral task. This spiritual path to caritas is a faith journey with faith deep in the knowledge that heaven is here, mostly unnoticed, hinted at perhaps, dreamed certainly. It's singing through us, intent on awakening us to our holiness, so that we might be home at last in this place that has been prepared for us. How might, or how does, caritas appear to you? How do you know loving kindness? Which sacred story helps you understand the symbolic language of the soul? As we continue here as a religious community, let us share our stories, that we will continue to understand each other and ourselves in new and more compassionate ways, as we awaken more fully to love.